redistribution, restitution, and tenure. The ANC has not used the provisions of the Constitution. However, it is also important to not create an impression of a rogue ANC that is about to expropriate land without compensation. That has not happened. If you go to South Africa today, you don't have a Zimbabwe situation of forced removals and so on. The ANC government, whatever its fault, has actually respected the rights of landowners. Many years ago, there was a willing buyer, willing seller, where redistribution and restitution could happen in a negotiated conversation with the landowners, who, of course, if we look historically, black people would say those are not the legitimate landowners. But post-1994, there was no one-upmanship or trying to force landowners off their land. It has not happened. Even now, when you look at what the ANC government is talking about, it is expropriation without compensation where it can be justified. That's what it says. It's talking about abandoned land, abandoned buildings, underused land. So I'm just saying that the conversation gets heated in the build-up to the election, and it is something that the EFF has brought on the table. But from the government's point of view, there has always been a negotiation on the land issue.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Thank you, Ms. Tlhabi. The chair now recognizes Rep. Sheriffless McCormick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your testimony here. I wanted to go back to what we were discussing when it came to our relationship. The major part of the administration has been trying to move our relationship, particularly with South Africa, forward. And we touched on some of the conditions. So I wanted to ask this question to anyone who would want to answer it. What are specifically some of the conditions that you would like to see South Africa abiding by, especially for its continued participation in AGOA?
I think one of the key things that I hoped would have been sort of focused on or come out in my testimony is the fact that we are really advocating for a differentiated approach in the foreign policy towards South Africa by the United States, which is not underpinned by conditionality. Because the conditionality that we could be encouraged to focus on right now really reflects and highlights the past policies that the United States has had towards South Africa. In this time of strategic competition, especially on the African continent, with South Africa in particular, the United States needs to adopt, in my view, and humbly saying, a more nuanced approach to the relationship between our two countries. This relationship...
I want to just pause you real quick because I do want to address, my next question was actually going to talk about the administration's position. The administration's position recently when it comes to Africa, there has been a renewed policy and efforts towards building relationships with Africa, where we're moving not just from giving Africa aid, but more of a dignified approach where it comes to trade, economic resiliency, partnerships. So the administration has laid out several initiatives, partnered with funding, and even introducing the African diaspora in the United States, partnering with Africa. And so that has been our position, and I wanted to get to that right afterwards, but I thought because you clearly identified some of the tension points with the participation with Russia, that we can look at the conditionality, and if we could specifically touch on that, and then we could take a look at if these new policy stances we've been taking, are they actually being felt, and are you feeling it? Because we can have, the administration could put forth this policy, but are you seeing it actually on the continent? Is it actually being amplified, or as it stands right now, is it just words on paper? So if you want to address that, you can.
Very quickly. In actual fact, it goes to the recommendations that I had in my presentation, which advocate for the following thing. The U.S., in our view, should really focus on a bottom-up approach. By this we mean direct more resources towards empowering civil society, citizens, key institutions that support democracy in South Africa. And this is because it is these parts of our society that have stood up as a bulwark against state capture, corruption, and other inequities that have happened in our country. The other aspect that I wanted to really emphasize here is that there's a need to strengthen private sector collaboration between the United States and South Africa, which will, in our view, foster greater economic growth, which benefits both parties. Finally, I also want to emphasize the following, that maybe there's a need to transition from, as you indicated, this aid-centric approach towards a trade engagement, leveraging on opportunities that are presented by the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
I want to step in for 1 minute before the chairman starts to give us that light tap, because he's putting a lot of pressure on us today, but thank you. I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to pinpoint exact points where we can grow, because we have programs present, even where we have educational institutions. Howard University has a program in South Africa where we had many discussions with the students in South Africa directly, trying to talk more about democracy and what they would like to see. So I want to know, how can we expand on that relationship, and also how can we deepen that relationship? So that's really the course of my questioning. I know you only have 30 seconds for anybody who wants to come in.
Well, I'll take 12 seconds. I think one of the areas that we overlook in South Africa is that South Africa institutions that I mentioned in my testimony are very robust and very strong, and we should look to partner, particularly in the financial sector, with South African institutions as we develop our ambitions or implement our ambitions on such things as the Development Finance Corporation.
I think also, let's just be mindful that there are a lot of politicians who say stupid things. And when they do that, it creates the impression that this is the stance of South Africa. We have a minister who recently said something about the CIA funding non-profit organizations. That's a lot of nonsense, and it gets called out in South Africa. What I would urge you to do is look at the tangible results. You mentioned PEPFAR, you mentioned USAID. When you go to the ground, when you go to the communities, those people are not listening to the politicians. So let's not frame that relationship, our relationship, as only being confined to what the politicians are saying. On the ground, communities are active, communities are entrepreneurial, communities need the support. That's where the results will lie.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for giving us a 38 seconds.
And thank you for your questioning discipline, and thank our panelists for their brevity. The chair will now recognize Rep. Kane for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.